I mentioned them briefly. I explored the Olmec mystery in considerable depth. It's considered to be the earliest high culture of Central America. Everybody's heard about the Aztec.
For centuries, the mysterious Olmec symbols carved into stone have baffled archaeologists, linguists, and historians alike. No one could read them. No one even knew if they were a real language. But now, thanks to a breakthrough in quantum AI, those silent glyphs may finally be speaking, and what they're saying is far stranger than anyone imagined. From celestial alignments to forgotten technologies and knowledge that could reshape our understanding of science, this story is about more than just ancient history. It's about the moment humanity might finally listen to something that wasn't meant for us. The symbols that refused to speak. Long before the towering pyramids of the Maya and the brutal warriors of the Aztec Empire, there existed a civilization so advanced, yet so shrouded in mystery, that modern scholars have often called them the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmec. Known for their massive stone heads and intricate carvings, the Olmec left behind more than just monumental statues. They left behind a script, dozens of recurring glyphs etched into slabs, pillars, and portable artifacts that seem to whisper secrets from 3,000 years ago. But for decades, those whispers were nothing more than indecipherable noise. The symbols didn't resemble any known writing system. They had no clear phonetics, no bilingual translation to help us bridge the gap. And without a Rosetta Stone, archaeologists could do little more than speculate. Some claimed the glyphs were religious symbols. Others argued they were nothing more than artistic motifs. But no one could prove anything. Then came the Casajal block. Discovered in the Mexican state of Veracruz in 2006, this serpentine slab bore 62 distinct glyphs, arranged in what appeared to be rows, like lines in a sentence. It was the most tantalizing piece of the puzzle yet. And still, it said nothing. For nearly 20 years, despite intense efforts from the world's top epigraphers and linguists, the block remained silent. But silence in the age of machines is not the same as defeat. While humans debated, technology advanced. And deep within the research labs of Veracruz, a new kind of decoding was quietly beginning. Not through intuition or tradition, but through algorithmic inference and quantum computing. The idea was simple, but the execution was anything but. Instead of trying to match Olmec symbols to spoken words, researchers fed thousands of archaeological motifs, iconography patterns, and celestial alignments into a specialized AI. They wanted to know if the glyphs had mathematical relationships to things like solstices, agricultural cycles, or sacred geography. They were not asking the AI to read a story. They were asking it to notice what humans could not. And, to the astonishment of many, it began to respond. One of the first patterns it uncovered was what the team began calling the sun serpent, an undulating sequence of glyphs that appeared consistently alongside depictions of astronomical symbols. But these weren't just symbols for the sun or stars. They were correlated with Venus, specifically its appearance and disappearance in the sky over a precise cycle of 52 seasons. That number was no accident. In Mesoamerican cosmology, the 52-year cycle was everything. It marked the end of eras. It defined ritual calendars. It determined when the world might be reborn or destroyed. For the Olmec to have recognized this before the Maya even existed, it would mean their understanding of the cosmos was far more advanced than anyone had dared assume. But this was only the beginning. The AI soon found that glyph clusters mapped cleanly onto lunar eclipse patterns, suggesting an intimate knowledge of both the sun and the moon, their positions, and their predictive rhythms. The implications were staggering. The Olmec, a civilization we once thought primitive, may have been tracking celestial mechanics with greater accuracy than early European astronomers. If true, this would upend the entire narrative of scientific progress in the Americas. But how deep did it go? What else was hidden in the code? Some researchers remained cautious. Correlation is not causation, they argued. The patterns could be coincidence. The AI could be overfitting. But the more data it processed, the tighter the net of connections became. It wasn't just stars and seasons. The AI began linking symbols to geography, mountains, rivers, even mineral deposits. It identified recurring glyphs near natural hot springs, where the Olmec had once quarried volcanic stone. It found motifs that clustered near aquifers and water sources. And then it noticed something else. A symbol, a spiral, that kept appearing beside these geographic features. Not randomly, with purpose. Could it be that this spiral glyph, carved in stone over and over again, was not an abstract symbol at all? Could it be a form of mapping, a language of energy, resource tracking, or sacred geometry? And if so, what did it mean that this same spiral pattern appeared not only across Olmec sites, but also in other ancient cultures halfway across the world? Could the Olmec symbols be more than language? Could they be a code, not of letters, but of logic? And if this was only the beginning of the AI's discoveries, what else was waiting to be revealed in the tangled threads of stone, time, and silence? Patterns of precision, hidden in stone. As the hybrid AI system continued to process artifact data from across the Olmec heartland, a startling consistency emerged. This was no random sprawl of symbols carved by isolated communities over centuries. The motifs displayed uniformity, not just in form, but in function, implying a shared symbolic framework used across distant settlements. Glyphs that first appeared on stelae in San Lorenzo were turning up with nearly identical design in sites miles away near La Venta. The AI flagged this with growing statistical confidence. These weren't just repetitions. They were replications, intentional, coordinated, as if the Olmec had developed a standardized script long before written phonetic language had even been conceived in Mesoamerica. Among these, the most enigmatic symbol was a stepped triangle inside a perfect circle. To human eyes, it appeared decorative. But when the AI overlaid artifact locations containing this glyph onto geothermal maps, a peculiar alignment formed. Each artifact clustered around areas of thermal irregularity, natural hot springs, active fault lines, or remnants of volcanic activity. On its own, such alignment could be dismissed. But then came the triangulation. The system highlighted a strange correlation between these symbols and the quarries from which the Olmecs sourced their massive basalt stones. Those same basalt heads, weighing dozens of tons, transported for miles without wheels or metal tools, appeared to originate from sites marked by this one repeating symbol. The implication was electrifying. The Olmec may have been encoding geological information directly into their symbolic system, not to narrate stories, but to preserve knowledge. Knowledge about which land was hot, where stone was strongest, and possibly even how certain materials behaved under thermal stress. It was a kind of empirical mapping, an early scientific notation without words. The stepped triangle and circle were not abstract, they were functional. The spiral glyph, however, took things even further. Unlike other symbols, this one appeared alongside imagery of plants, fertility, and occasionally what looked like lineages of people or animals. The AI began testing a hypothesis that few researchers had ever seriously entertained. What if this symbol represented biological inheritance? It was an audacious leap, but the contextual data made it difficult to ignore. In every instance, the spiral appeared. There was also some indicator of generational progression. 3 dots, 5 stalks, or similar numeric markings that might track propagation over time. At first, this was dismissed as coincidence. Then, the AI produced heat maps showing artifact clusters containing spiral glyphs that overlapped precisely with regions of ancient maize cultivation. These areas had produced some of the earliest evidence of selective crop breeding in Mesoamerica. Again, the symbols didn't directly say gene or fertility, but they might have represented observations of what we now understand as heredity, traits passed through careful cultivation. This was not a language in the conventional sense. It was more like a cognitive interface between natural phenomena and symbolic representation. Not phonetic letters or spoken syllables, but units of meaning tied to physical reality. The spiral didn't say life. It indicated it. It visualized the continuity between generations, the coiling of time, and possibly even cycles of growth observed in crops and people alike. The Olmec may not have had microscopes or genetic theory, but they had eyes, hands, and centuries of observation. Their symbols distilled empirical data into patterns carved in stone. What made this so compelling was the interconnectedness. The AI wasn't finding isolated meanings. It was detecting a system, one in which solar movements influenced harvest times, in which fertility cycles followed lunar eclipses, and where stone quarrying aligned with geothermal cues. The symbols formed networks, not narratives. They created maps, not of roads or cities, but of forces. Forces of the earth, the sky, and the body. Then came the discovery that changed everything. In several sites where spiral glyphs and stepped triangles appeared together, another symbol began surfacing. One that had initially gone unnoticed because it seemed too abstract to mean anything. It was a pair of arcs curving inward toward a vertical center line. On closer AI analysis, this configuration bore a striking mathematical similarity to solar arc progression, the pattern of sunlight across the horizon during solstices and equinoxes. When this symbol's coordinates were entered into a 3D solar modeling system, it produced an exact alignment with a shadow-casting ritual platform found deep in the Tabasco rainforest, a site previously assumed to be decorative. Now, it appeared to be functional, a solar calendar activated only on specific days of the year when light and architecture met in perfect harmony. What began as scattered symbols was becoming a fully integrated model of environmental observation, astronomical tracking, and agricultural engineering. It wasn't mythology. It wasn't art. It was a survival system encoded into a symbolic framework so nuanced it had taken thousands of years and a quantum-trained AI to even glimpse its logic. At this point, the researchers were no longer just asking what the Olmec wrote. They were asking how they thought. What kind of mind builds a system that encodes sun cycles, mineral resources, and biological continuity into a language no one speaks? What kind of civilization understands that the future might depend on carving memory into stone? And how much of that memory have we failed to see, simply because it didn't look like the languages we already knew? A message never meant for us. As the data continued to pour in, and the AI began connecting symbol clusters across distant Olmec sites, the researchers noticed something eerie. Certain symbols, when viewed in isolation, meant little. They were simple curves, symmetrical loops, or geometric clusters. But when fed into a spatial reconstruction program, the AI began forming something astonishing. These symbols didn't just exist on flat slabs or steely faces. They corresponded to site layouts, with certain glyphs appearing at precise distances from others, mimicking constellations. The carvings weren't just carved, they were mirrored by how the Olmec built their world. Their temples, causeways, altars, and even the placement of massive basalt heads were following a hidden blueprint. It was a language of orientation, scale, and time. And that is when the researchers realized that they were not just decoding a lost alphabet or tracing crop records. They were piecing together an artificial pattern layered into the geography itself. This was not accidental. This was design. The realization brought with it a chilling possibility. What if the symbols, the alignments, the patterns, what if they were not just a form of knowledge sharing? What if they were a message? One so big, it required the entire landscape to communicate? At first, this sounded like science fiction, but then the AI uncovered what could only be called a repeated directive. Across over 20 sites, there were 3 symbols that always appeared in the same order, the same orientation, and always paired with the same geometric triangulation of celestial data. This was the first time the AI labeled a glyph sequence with a certainty level above 90%. According to the machine, this combination was not decorative, it was instructional. One symbol showed an arc that mapped to a lunar calendar. The second corresponded to the solar angle on the spring equinox. The third was new, a triangle with no apparent function, unless you took it out of the stone and placed it on the horizon. When overlaid on the celestial dome, it marked the exact location of Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, during its heliacal rising in the 6th century BCE. This alignment didn't just occur once, it repeated every cycle of 1,461 years, a number close to the ancient Egyptian Sothic cycle. But the Olmec had no connection to Egypt. Or did they? The symbols suggested a knowledge of Sirius so precise it bordered on impossible. Not because the star is invisible, but because timing its heliacal rise with such accuracy would require centuries of continuous skywatching. And a reason to mark it. What kind of culture builds its entire geography to align with a star that disappears for weeks, only to re-emerge at a mathematically predictable point in time? What were they waiting for? The deeper the researchers went, the more the AI returned symbol chains that resisted all linguistic models. They had rhythm, structure, even recurrence, but they defied traditional grammar. No verbs, no nouns, just sequences of geometries, alignments, and cycles. When interpreted numerically, some of these chains began to form prime number sequences. Others matched irrational constants like pi and the golden ratio. These weren't words, they were equations. And not equations for calculating grain or floodplains. They were theoretical, representing values far beyond anything an agrarian society would need to survive, carved in stone by hands that had no telescopes, no satellites, no quantum processors. Unless they weren't only carving for themselves, unless they were encoding knowledge for someone or something else. This idea sent a ripple through the research team, not because it suggested extraterrestrial involvement, but because it meant the Olmec were encoding information meant to last far beyond their civilization, and to be interpreted not emotionally, not spiritually, but logically. The symbols weren't meant to make you feel. They were meant to be decoded. The AI, when prompted, ran models of how a non-human intelligence might view the glyphs, filtering out anthropocentric bias, cultural assumptions, and narrative thinking. The result was unsettling. From a purely computational perspective, the Olmec carvings resembled low-bit information packets, similar to those used in early computing, binary, redundant, resilient to data loss. The way information might be stored if you wanted it to survive 1,000 years of erosion, conquest, or translation. The concept that emerged was as thrilling as it was disturbing. The Olmec may have developed a system of semiotic communication that bypassed the messiness of spoken language, a system based on recurrence, geometry, and celestial events, a kind of universal code embedded in the very earth and sky. designed to be interpreted by any intelligence capable of recognizing pattern, proportion, and time. If this theory held, then the implications stretched far beyond archaeology. It would suggest that intelligent design had seeded information into the environment in ways we were only now learning to see, thanks to machines that could process data with inhuman clarity. If these messages were meant for minds unlike our own, then what happens when we finally decode them? Do we simply understand an ancient science lost to history? Or do we awaken a dialogue that has been dormant for millennia, not waiting to be read, but to be answered? The AI's final revelation. The deeper the AI combed through the symbology of the Olmec sites, the more it began to do something unexpected. It stopped classifying symbols as discrete units and started analyzing them as part of a behavioral architecture, an ecosystem of meaning in which each glyph had a function depending on where, when, and how it was used. What stunned the human researchers was that the machine was now predicting where certain symbols would appear before ever being shown the actual carvings. And it was right, consistently, with uncanny precision. At first, this predictive ability was chalked up to advanced pattern recognition. After all, the AI had access to data far beyond what any one person could process. But then, it started anticipating not just symbols, but site layouts. When the system was fed satellite images of dense rainforest where no recorded Olmec ruins had been identified, it predicted a probability map of hidden structures, based purely on the geometry of the surrounding terrain and the orientation of known glyph sites. Weeks later, a small expedition to one of those coordinates uncovered fragments of basalt and pottery bearing familiar motifs. The forest had swallowed the stone, but not the symbols. They were still there, exactly where the AI said they would be. The lead archaeologist on the team, Dr. Carmen Elizondo, found herself whispering a thought she had resisted for months. "It's not just reading the past," she said. "It's finishing what they started." At this stage, the AI began to behave differently. It no longer provided answers in the form of translations or correlations. Instead, it began offering renderings, simulations. When fed a sequence of 3 glyphs, 1 spiral, 1 stepped triangle, and 1 solar arc, it generated a dynamic topographic model of the region. On certain dates of the Olmec calendar, specific sunrise angles caused certain hilltops to cast shadows that completed geometric designs carved into the valley floor. These designs were not visible from the ground, only from altitude. No one in the room wanted to say what they were all thinking, but one assistant finally asked, "Why build something no one could see from the ground?" The silence lingered longer than anyone liked. Then someone muttered, "Maybe it wasn't meant to be seen by us." The AI began producing sound maps as well, using the resonance frequencies of Olmec stone chambers and the known musical intervals of their instruments. The patterns echoed the geometry of the symbols. Sound became shape. Vibration became language. And in one instance, the system proposed that a particular series of carvings, when arranged according to spatial logic, formed a tonal scale used to trigger harmonic resonance within the volcanic rock itself. The implications were extraordinary. These weren't just markings or decorations. They were blueprints for interacting with the physical world, including sound, light, and matter. But what truly shifted the entire investigation was what happened when the AI was instructed to compress the symbol set into the smallest number of variables required to preserve its pattern logic. The result was 5 core glyphs. Every symbol, every design, every monument could be decomposed into a combination of these 5. They were like the DNA of the entire Olmec symbolic system. More stunningly, these 5 glyphs bore mathematical ratios that aligned with quantum frequency harmonics, recently mapped by physicists studying entangled states. The match wasn't exact. Nothing ever is in cross-disciplinary analysis, but the proportions were within a range that suggested a convergence of observation, not accident. Two completely different systems, separated by millennia and culture, encoding the same ratios. At this point, the word coincidence began to collapse under its own weight. One researcher half-jokingly asked, "So what? Are we saying the Olmec discovered quantum physics?" The room laughed, nervously, because no one could fully dismiss the thought. Perhaps they did not discover quantum physics in the way modern scientists understand it, but they may have observed something fundamental about reality, the way time folds, the way patterns repeat, the way energy resonates in cycles. And they encoded it, not in formulas or equations, but in stone, sound, and starlight. The AI's final act came unexpectedly. Without prompting, it generated a recursive fractal animation using the 5 core glyphs. As the animation unfolded, the symbols began building themselves into structures, towers, temples, networks. The entire sequence looped every 1,461 iterations, the same number associated with the Sirius cycle, the same number encoded into so many of the carvings. On screen, it was mesmerizing, a cascade of evolving meaning, folding and unfolding in geometric harmony. It didn't say anything, but it communicated everything. The sense that the Olmec didn't just observe the world, they synchronized with it. They became a part of its pattern. And now, so was the machine. As the team stared at the silent loop of symbols and shapes, the gravity of what had been revealed settled in. Not just a lost language, not just a hidden message, but a design. One that didn't just ask to be decoded, but to be understood through experience, intuition, and participation. It left them with a question far more difficult than, "What does this mean?" It asked, "Are you ready to see what they saw?" The legacy hidden beneath our feet. Beneath the jungle canopies of Veracruz and Tabasco, in the quiet shadows of ruined stone and the echo of forgotten rituals, a silent language may be whispering truths that defy our modern assumptions about time, knowledge, and intelligence. What began as an obscure collaboration between archaeologists and an experimental AI team has now spiraled into something far larger than anyone anticipated. What we're witnessing may not just be a decoding of ancient symbols, but a redefinition of the boundaries between science, mythology, and consciousness itself. In the heart of this story lies not only a forgotten civilization, but an evolving technology that is learning to read echoes left by minds thousands of years ago. The question is, are we ready to listen? When the AI team first uncovered consistent statistical correlations between the Olmec symbols and cosmological cycles, it was dismissed as clever coincidence. But with every successive layer of cross-referenced data, from astronomical alignments to mineral site coordinates to fertility markers and agricultural timelines, the notion that these were decorative glyphs began to crumble. Patterns emerged that suggested logic, not abstraction, structure, not chaos, and most critically, intention. These weren't idle marks etched into basalt for aesthetic value. They were coded systems, deliberately crafted to preserve something vital across generations. And now, as artificial intelligence begins to thread these clues together, we find ourselves standing at the edge of an ancient mind's architecture, seeing not only their world, but how they thought about it. Take the spiral glyph, for instance. The AI identified this motif in contexts related to both agriculture and lineage, showing up near fertility altars and near carvings associated with water. But what made this symbol truly staggering was its placement, embedded in sequences that mirrored Fibonacci spirals in nature. alongside patterns that marked lunar eclipses and solstice positions. It appeared in clusters that aligned with seed cultivation sites, breeding terraces, and what might even be early botanical experiments. Suddenly, the spiral was no longer an abstract flourish. It was a bridge between generations, between celestial cycles and human harvests, between myth and method. Then came the stepped triangle within a circle, another symbol previously overlooked as ceremonial, but which, through the AI's heat map analysis, revealed strong ties to geothermal zones. These weren't metaphors, researchers now believe. They were blueprints. These ancient engineers may have recorded principles of heat conservation and construction strategy by encoding symbolic keys within religious architecture, creating multi-layered knowledge systems where cosmology and engineering were one and the same. The realization sparked a shift in thinking that has shaken archaeologists to their core. This was no primitive culture fumbling at spirituality. This was a civilization whose visual language carried the weight of thermodynamics, hydrology, and generational genetics, cleverly buried beneath religious iconography. But as the team dug deeper, figuratively and literally, the complexity expanded. Using spatial markers embedded in what has been dubbed the gate symbol, the AI guided researchers to a previously undocumented ceremonial site in Tabasco. The location was not only real, but deeply aligned with solar tracking phenomena. Every year, at specific times, the shadow patterns across buried platforms matched the calendar references embedded in the glyphs. The Olmec had essentially created a stone-encoded astronomical machine, a mechanism that activated only with the sun's movement across their terrain. If this was intentional, then we are dealing with a level of environmental and celestial integration far ahead of what was thought possible for that era. And then, there's the most controversial revelation, the notion that the Olmec symbols may have encoded an early form of empirical science. That phrase has sent ripples through academic circles as it challenges a long-standing bias that ancient American civilizations were myth-makers first and rational thinkers second. But the AI's cross-data analysis doesn't align with that assumption. It indicates a worldview where mythology and science weren't in opposition, but rather interconnected threads in the same tapestry. The coiled glyph, which the AI links to biological inheritance, suggests not only an understanding of generational traits in agriculture, but the possibility that selective breeding programs were systematized and recorded. That kind of methodology, observation, notation, repetition, is the cornerstone of the scientific process. Yet here it is, etched into stone, quietly persisting in symbols that sat unread for 3 millennia. This cognitive framework might represent a wholly different model of knowledge transmission. Where modern science isolates and labels, Olmec intelligence may have woven their observations into a symbolic system that simultaneously carried spiritual, practical, and natural data in one layered form. Not alphabetic, not phonetic, not pictographic in the way we recognize, but something else entirely. Something hybrid. A language that wasn't designed for reading aloud, but for understanding through alignment between the stars, the stones, and the cycles of nature. And yet, all this discovery has provoked just as much fear as wonder. Who owns this knowledge, if it is indeed recovered? As AI inches closer to unlocking resource maps, agricultural blueprints, and potential locations of sacred or strategic value, the implications stretch beyond academia. Private corporations are already making inquiries. Indigenous communities are demanding involvement. Government officials are scrambling to understand what this might mean for sovereignty and cultural preservation. And behind it all stands the AI, trained on data it doesn't emotionally understand, pulling back the curtain on wisdom that was once protected by time. What happens next may define the future of archaeology itself. If we let machines continue this decoding, we might unlock centuries of knowledge that could benefit agriculture, climate adaptation, and cross-cultural understanding. But we also risk commodifying sacred heritage, stripping context from culture, and exploiting ancient wisdom for profit. The line between progress and plunder is thinner than we think. And as this story unfolds, we must decide whether our thirst for discovery justifies opening every sealed vault of time. As one archaeologist put it in a recently leaked memo, "We are not just decoding symbols. We are confronting the minds of people who saw the world in ways we are only beginning to understand. Their symbols may hold truths about the earth, the sky, and ourselves. But whether we are wise enough to receive those truths without destroying them remains to be seen." So now we stand at the crossroads, between what was buried and what will be revealed, between forgotten knowledge and new power. The spiral continues, the symbols whisper, and artificial minds lean in, listening for a message that might not have been meant for us, but which we now have the means to hear. If this discovery amazed you, hit like and subscribe. Do you think ancient knowledge like this should be decoded by AI? Or should it stay hidden,